Welcome to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast, where we interview business owners and real estate investors that share tips and tricks on how to grow your cash flow and reach financial freedom.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. Today, I have for you a very exciting guest, David Pere. David is an active duty Marine who got started in real estate investing in 2015 when he house hacked a duplex with an FHA loan. He currently devotes his free time to teaching personal finance and real estate investing for the service members and the working class. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bo. How's it going?
Yeah, very good. Glad to have you. Thanks for joining us on this interview very early in the morning. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and a glimpse into your personal life?
Born in Northern California, grew up in the middle of Arkansas, Midwest. I was a homeschooler, so I was kind of weird. In fact, I should show you this picture I posted on my Instagram the other day of me in high school with like an afro and mutton chops looking like Hyde from that 70s show. You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed.
I saw that.
Yeah, you'd be amazed to know that I was not a stoner. I just looked like it. Joined the Marine Corps. I do transportation logistics. So I started out, basically a truck driver. Did 3 years on recruiting duty. Figured out that either I'm really decent at sales or there's a lot of suckers where I was recruiting. I did okay there. If you listen to this and you were one of the people I recruited, I'm joking. It just kind of shows that being friendly and not lying to people goes a long way. And then I came back out, I got orders to Hawaii. So now I've been out here for 2.5 years and I'm getting ready to move to San Diego in June.
It looks like in a couple months, you're going to be coming to sunny California. You're going to be right up my alley.
Yeah. I'll be, I'm hoping to get a place right there in Oceanside, Carlsbad area.
Oh yeah. Love that place. You're going to have some really good tacos over there.
Oh, I know. I'm itching for some Old Town San Diego and some In-N-Out. Honestly, I miss me some In-N-Out. Even Chick-fil-A, we don't have that out here in Hawaii or Olive Garden. I've got like withdrawals.
Oh my goodness. All right. We're going to have an In-N-Out Chick-fil-A party.
Oh yeah, I'm down.
Nice. What was your why when you first got started?
Man, I don't know that I had a why when I first got started. I think my why when I first got started was this job stinks. I want to make some money so I don't have to do it forever. Which is not necessarily accurate. I love the Marine Corps. So I was in 2015, someone handed me a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, I told him, like all good Marines, that I don't read. So he told me to listen to it on Audible. Listen to the book while I was driving around to and from different places. And something clicked. Kind of like everyone else. And I was just like, man, I need to do that. So I read a couple other books, some bigger pocket books, and pulled the trigger on that duplex you were talking about, and haven't really looked back since. I think a lot of it, in terms of why, like, it's just been fun. The thrill of the deal has been exciting. So that's probably been part of it. And then as I've, progressed, the why has become more developed as the desire to really just work when I want rather than on what I want, and have control of my time and my environment is kind of my why. I don't want to be, people talk about financial independence, retire early, and financial freedom. But the reality is a lot of us don't want to retire early. We just want to work on what we want when we want rather than be a peon. Because I think retiring might not necessarily be something I would be happy with. It's a cool idea, but I got to have something to keep myself busy. I just want it to be something that I want to do to keep myself busy.
Yeah, exactly. I think once you reach financial independence and you're going towards financial freedom, it's not really about having a set date and retiring. It's about, having that time freedom to do what you really want. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. Can you kind of talk to us about, the markets that you invest in, how you started your research, and how a person just starting out might go about doing so?
started because I lived there and I didn't do any market research and said, I'm going to start investing and I'm going to do it right now. Now, I would not have done that had I lived in like San Diego. I would have done a lot more homework. But in Missouri, the house prices are, I mean, I bought a duplex for $81,000 and that was like full asking price, and it cash flowed right off the bat. So it wasn't too hard to justify pulling the trigger. That being said, I mean, I also was, I'd lived there for 2 years, so I was intimately familiar with the fact that there were a lot of jobs and it was a stable economy. If you look back like 10 years, the market appreciation was kind of a flat line as opposed to a roller coaster like the rest of the world. So, in the Midwest, it's kind of nice. It's really easy to cash flow in the Midwest, vice a lot of high appreciation cities, because you don't have to worry so much about the market going up and down and the prices being so expensive. Cheap house will cash flow. But to answer your question, as far as like what I look for in market analysis now, if I'm going to look into a place, so a lot of it is just trends, and it's all information you can find on Google. It's actually surprising how easy it is to find some of the stuff. You just type in like such and such city census data or population data. So the biggest two things that I want to see are a population increase trending like at least 1 or 2% up over the last couple of years. That's like 1 or 2% a year, not like 1% up over the last decade. That would not look so good. And then, I mean, even that would be better than trending down, I guess. And then economic data. So you want to see that there's finances moving in, right? So there's money somewhat moving in. Now, I'm not saying it has to be anything crazy. Like I'm not, if Amazon moved to Springfield, that'd be great. But I don't need something like that to happen to justify investing. But you want to make sure there's different centers, like different economies there. So for example, Silicon Valley is all tech, right? So if and when tech decides to start moving out of Silicon Valley, there might not be anything left. But, like in Missouri, for example, there's a Kraft Cheese has a big plant there. Solo Cup has a big plant there. Budweiser is big there. The O'Reilly's headquarters is there. So those are all somewhat similar blue collar type jobs. But, there's the auto industry, the alcohol industry, the food industry, and the I guess consumer goods like plastic industry all right next to each other. But then on top of that, there's 4 or 5 different colleges that are all growing. And so they're all different, they're kind of intertwined, but if Budweiser goes out of business or moves out of state, the college is still going to be there. So I like to see, at least 2 or 3 industries represented with somewhat large jobs. Like I don't foresee O'Reilly's moving away. Not that they're a huge industry, but there's other bigger companies that have come in because of that. So you basically looking for trending upwards in population and economy, just showing there's jobs coming in and there's people coming in, and then your rent is going to work out.
Yeah. And when it comes to real estate investing, I know there's a ton of different strategies. You go to boot camps and REI meetups and they talk about wholesaling, they talk about commercial real estate, residential. How did you kind of navigate through some of the noise and end up choosing buy and hold? And is there any other strategies that you're also working on?
Yeah, I have shiny object syndrome. So I can be very guilty of, if something seems like a good idea, I go for it. I chose buy and hold because the house hack idea made perfect sense to me. I was living in an apartment. I was paying like $550 a month to live there. And I was doing the math on the house hack idea. I was like, I could probably save some money. So, I went and looked into it. And I bought a duplex, and I ended up, instead of paying $550 to rent an apartment, I was paying $150 to own a duplex. Because the other guy was paying all but $150 a month of my, rent and utilities. So it was cheaper for me to live somewhere I owned that was nicer than it was for me to rent the apartment I had. The only downside is, my duplex didn't have a pool and a community center and a tennis court, but I didn't play tennis and I don't community centers. So I guess it was really not that bad. So I guess that's kind of how I settled into the buy and hold. It just made sense. And then once I did it, it was good. I've kind of done a little bit of everything at this point. I've wholesaled a little bit out here, but that's just the market in Hawaii to rent and cash flow. I'm not going to say it's not doable, but I don't think it's worth it because let's say you can cash flow $1,000 a month out here. That's awesome. probably cost you like 800,000 to buy that property, or 400,000 or 500,000 or whatever. So, $1,000 a month of cash flow is okay. Sorry, we gotta edit that out. Oh, man. Normally I'm awake by 5:30 in the morning. Anyway, I don't care if you edit that out. You can leave that in there. Whatever. It ain't gonna bother me if people hear me on. So out here in Hawaii, you might cash flow like $1,000, but you might have spent $500,000 to cash flow $1,000. Whereas back in Missouri, I got a 10-plex. It cost me like $250, and it cash flows $1,500 plus. Maybe a bad month, 1,000, but it's still a better return. So yeah, sure, you can make it work out here, but you're still gambling with the appreciation game. Is the market going to go up? Is the market going to go down? Whereas it just makes sense to buy and hold. So a lot of people out here, what they'll do is they'll wholesale houses or they'll flip houses out here in Hawaii, and then that's active money, and they will take that profit and move it into passive money in Missouri or wherever.
Okay. So have you tried any of those other strategies, or are you strictly buy and hold?
I kind of wholesaled one house, and I've partnered with some people to learn about fix and flips out here, more or less just to learn, because even if I don't plan on being a fix and flip investor, if I know a little bit about it and I find a property in Missouri that makes sense, then I can use that tool if I want to, or I can at least speak to the numbers if I give the deal to someone else. But I personally, buy and hold will always be my go-to strategy. Any other strategy will just be a means to build capital for more buy and holds.
I know you just mentioned the duplex house hacking. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that? And did you end up self-managing the property? If so, what was that process like? Living in one unit and having the tenant on the other unit. Were there any kind of difficulties that you had to navigate through on that part?
Yeah, so no, I didn't. I absolutely did not, and don't plan on being a manager. In fact, it's really cool to live in one house, one half of a duplex, and the other side not know that you own the place. It makes it kind of convenient to spy on them. Not spy on them, that's a jerk way to say that. But if they're doing something that you wouldn't want done, it's really easy to tell the property manager, and then you're not the bad guy. It's kind of funny because they can vent to you about how the property manager's a jerk, and you're like, yeah, I told him to tell you that. But no, so I did not want to self-manage for a couple of reasons. And there's more money in that, right? Like I would have made a little bit better money. But for me, the $70 a month or whatever that it was in my management fee was worth the peace of mind of me. Actually, at the time, it was probably only $35 because I was not paying management fee on my own side. So it's probably only like $35 a month that I was paying a management fee. It was totally worth it to not have to deal with crap, whether literal crap or just annoying tenant. So yeah, they never knew that I owned the place. I think they might've figured it out at one point, but I just made it a point, which has been nice because it made the transition smooth. And then when I moved away, for me, it's just so much easier to not, if you have a good manager in place, to just not worry about any of that.
Okay, that's awesome. So in terms of the numbers, you mentioned you did a FHA loan. So how much down payment was that? And you still cash flowed $150?
Yeah. So, So sorry. At the time when I was living in it, I was paying $150 left out of my mortgage. So I wasn't actually cash flowing anything. I was just about breaking even, but it was saved me $350 a month on what I was paying in my apartment fee. So I guess that's kind of like cash flow. Now it makes probably about $200, $300 a month in cash flow. I used the FHA loan, so it's 3.5% down. It came out with closing costs. I think it was like $3,600 or something like that. Or not closing costs, but like the fees for inspection and stuff. And it hasn't made that much every year, but it's come close. So I've basically made my money back or at least half of my money back every year since. So I'm sitting at probably pulling in $9 or $10 in cash flow so far, and I only paid $3,600 for it. So the math, 3 years, triple my money, not too bad.
Yeah.
Considering that it was just this duplex that I was like, screw it, let's do it. And it really wasn't the best deal because I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to learn the hard way.
Right. And I think, I don't know if you read the book by Scott Trench, Set for Life. That was one of the first books that I read on real estate investing specifically. And he really explains this, very well. And that's how he got started. And to this day, I still think that's the best way to get started and the most economical way to do it as well. And it kind of even works when you're in the coastal markets of Los Angeles, because I was looking at the numbers. You definitely can't cash flow by doing the conventional 20% down. But if you're able to find a duplex, let's just say even at $600,000, because a 3-bed and a 2-bed, I actually saw one on the MLS recently for $600,000 nearby where I live. And the 3-bed would have rented for $2,800 and the 2-bed would have rented for $1,800. And let's just say you pick the 2-bed and then you live in that for 1 year and then you move out, and it's going to cash flow because of the low interest rates. And if you're able to increase the rents over time, you have a cash flowing property in the LA market where it's super expensive. So, I mean, that's really one way to get started. If anything else, like David mentioned, you're really reducing your living costs, because if you're to get like a condo in LA or anything like that, it's going to easily cost you $2,500, and that's, renting money that you're not benefiting from. So I think house hacking is simply one of the best ways to get started. And I'm curious, after you did this one, I see a lot of people every year kind of move, especially if they're mobile and they're single and they don't have a lot of attachments. They pretty much like plop a new rental property every year. Was that something that you ended up doing, or you're like, okay, I just need to get my own place now?
No, so kind of neither. I want to house hack again, and I moved to Hawaii, and it just did not work out. So at the time I got here, the market was appreciating like 10, 20% year over year. And I mean, I kid you not, I made like full price offers, a little bit over full price offers, and people were coming in over the top in cash, which, in a market like Missouri, okay, cool. Someone dumped 100 grand cash on this property. That sucks. But this is, I mean, we're talking, I made an offer at one point on a house for like $725,000, and someone dropped like almost 800 grand in cash and said, nope, I want that one. And you're like, okay.
Here's some coconuts.
Yeah, man, okay. Well, I guess I'm going to move on to the next one. And we made 5 or 6 offers. We realized that the place that would have cash flowed, or at least appreciated on the island, that would have made sense to at least pull the trigger and we might have been able to buy something, I would have had to commute like 45 minutes each direction, which I was totally cool with. My wife was pregnant and I got told no. So we moved on base. So, the house on base is so much nicer than anything I'd be able to afford out in town. I mean, I've got $1 million view, a lot more square footage, an extra bathroom over what I would have gotten. It's 2 stories. It's nice construction. So it's a huge place. The only downside is, we give up our entire housing allowance to live here. So there's no financial gain for living in this place. So the intent will be, when we leave to house hack, we've actually talked about finding a duplex in the Oceanside Vista area. Although there's some other stuff that might go on when I'm looking at getting out of the military. So depending on how that goes, she may actually go back to Missouri ahead of time, and I might be bacheloretting it up. And if that's the case, then I'll probably buy like a 3 or 4 bedroom condo for dirt cheap and Airbnb all the extra rooms out, and try to like have as small of a payment as possible and make at least some income on the side, and then be able to be rid of it when I'm done and move on. So we'll see what happens.
Nice. I think that's a great segue into my next question of financing and scaling and things like that. One of the things that I noticed with some of my military serviceman buddies is that, there are different programs out there like the VA loan, as well as also housing stipends. For a non-military member, I was thinking that one of the great things that you can do early on to help with the velocity of your investing and scaling your portfolio is definitely kind of reducing your expenses and reinvesting your investment money, not living off of it, back into your business and continuing to just add fuel to the fire. I'm wondering, with the housing stipend and things like that, do you see yourself being able to like 10x that and being able to just put everything back into the business, or do you see any unique advantages?
Yeah. So the nice thing is, so we get this housing allowance, uh, and it's an allowance. It's not taxed, which is one nice thing. It varies based on your area. So it's more useful in some. So like in Missouri, my housing allowance was like 800, 900 bucks. Out here in Hawaii, it's like 3,100 bucks. In San Diego, it'll be like 2,900, 3,000. So it's just enough to buy. They try to make it just enough to buy a decent single family home for you and your family. It's not a whole lot more than that. But if you buy a duplex, for around that amount and then rent the other side out, and it cuts that in half, then yeah, you get to keep the difference. The problem is that most people in the military, they see a $3,000 housing allowance and they say, ooh, I can spend $3,000. Let me see what the fanciest place I can find for $3,000 is, and I'm going to live it up, which is cool. And I get it. I would have done that 2-3 years ago too. Would have been like, sweet, I got a pool, I'm living like a king, because at the end of the day, it is a housing allowance, so might as well use it for housing. But if you pay $2,500 to live there, now you're pocketing $6,000 that year. Or I plan on trying to find, I'm either going to try to, if I end up living there alone for the last year, I'm either going to try to find an apartment for like $1,200 and just pocket the other 1,800, or like I said, try to find like a cheap condo, cheap house, and try to Airbnb the other units. So now I'm pocketing some of my housing allowance, and I'm bringing in some income by renting out rooms to crazy people visiting San Diego. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Nice. Let's talk about the 10 unit in Springfield, Missouri. I read about a little bit about the details on your website, but this is really intriguing. How you found the deal, how you financed it, any negotiations. Can you tell us about that deal?
Yeah. So I found this because I was sending letters out. I was going home for Christmas. So I sent some letters out, probably like 100 letters, to people who own like duplexes and triplexes in the area that didn't live in them. So absentee homeowners. The reason for that just being, then it's an investment, or someone died and it got passed on, and it's not their actual house. I got a couple callbacks, but I got one call back and the guy was like, I don't have a duplex, or I have a duplex, I'm not going to sell it to you, but I have a 10 unit I'm trying to sell. And I was like, oh, cool. That's way out of my comfort zone, but let's take a look at it. And of the 10 units, I think I got to walk in 2, because everything else was, rented, or they weren't home or whatever. So I saw 2 of the 10 units, and they really weren't that impressive, but the numbers were good. And I was like, okay, well, we can work on the not impressive. The building was kind of run down. It was probably like a C- neighborhood. It wasn't a great neighborhood. It didn't have great tenants. There were like 2 registered sex offenders living in it. So we knew we were going to evict some people right away. But it was not an expensive building, and it was in a decent area of town as far as proximity to downtown. So it's not a nice area of town, but it's close enough to downtown that I think it eventually will turn over. A lot of the people who live in it are Section 8 or, retirees. So it's actually kind of a quiet place. So we got it. It was listed at, the guy wanted like 240,000. I negotiated him down to like 225, even though 240, it still would have worked. 225. And then when the inspection came back, there were some repairs that needed to be done. And so somehow or another, we ended up, instead of asking him for money back or to pay for the repairs, he just offered to take whatever that dollar amount was and just take it off the purchase price, which was kind of unique, because we'd already done the bank financing. The bank was already ready to roll. And so by the time that happened, the bank was like, well, we're just going to, rather than changing all the documents again, we'll just stick with what we got. And so I went from financing like 80% from the bank and 20% from me to 85% from the bank and 15% from me. And then in the negotiation process, I talked him into seller financing 10%, before that happened. So it ended up being 85% bank finance, 10% seller financing, and like 5.1% me. So I paid $10,900 to get into a property that cash flows anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 a month. So I haven't quite recouped my entire investment yet because I repainted the exterior and did probably about 15,000 of repairs, but I've recouped my down payment, and by the end of this year, I will have recouped the rest of it. So again, 2 years to return my money, about a 50% cash on cash, probably in the first year. Not too bad. And after that, it'll probably be, it's a good return. As far as negotiations, I had just read the book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which I highly recommend to anybody looking to, really to do anything in life. But it's a good book. In fact, it's one of those books I need to buy the physical copy. I like to, if I listen to a book on Audible and it has a profound impact, I like to buy the physical copy and read it again and highlight it. And then I'll go through a third time and read just the highlights. So it's one of the books I need to buy the physical copy of. But I used some of his strategies. So originally, I only needed like 9,000 to cover the repairs on the property, 9 or 10,000. And I asked for like 16 to set a high anchor. They came back at like 11. So I'd already covered how much I needed to for the repairs, but I was like, well, let's try some more of these negotiation techniques. And I ended up getting them up to like 12,500 that they cut off the price for repairs when I only needed like 9,500. So I saved an extra $3,000 right there. And then, and then it ended up being $3,000 less out of my pocket, which meant that I could do some more repairs for the property and evict those people faster. So I was able to do some turnover. So I think it's kind of funny when you think about it that I made a 50% cash on cash return with 3 evictions in the first 6 months. People talk about, evictions and toilets and all this other stuff. So in the first 6 months, I evicted 3 people, 2 of which were planned, 1 of which was not. Andy took my roof out with a U-Haul. It took 6 months to get the insurance money. So, all that to say, if you do your numbers all right, you can weather some decent storms, because there were some definite unexpected expenses with a $2,000 roof repair, not knowing if we're getting the money back from insurance, and some other interesting things that went on in the first few months, and it all worked out. So hopefully this year will be even better cash flow now that I have it fully occupied, and we've increased rents a little bit. We've done some rubs for utilities. I feel like I should explain that acronym, but I don't actually remember. What is it, like rental utility budget system? I don't know what it stands for, but basically it's where if you don't have everyone individually metered, they split the utilities amount. So instead of, if I have $1,000 utility bill, I'll split it with all of them up to $35 a month or whatever. So, at least part of my utility bill is covered, which increases the income and decreases the expenses. I really should remember what RUB stands for. Do you know what RUB stands for?
Ratio Utility Billing System.
There we go. See, that's almost close to rental utility budget system.
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm making stuff up over here, but I knew what it was, and that's all that really matters in life. Yeah. I mean, whatever.
Tomato.
Yeah, they say, I forget who said it. I think you said it. Was it you on my podcast who said that we used to get paid for the size of the problems we solve, but now we get paid for the questions we ask because it's so easy to find answers to stuff. I don't know if that was you, but anyway, point being, information's of 2 kinds. It doesn't, what you know, and if you can find knowledge. So it doesn't matter if you have all the answers. It just matters if you know what you're talking about, you know where to find answers.
I like that. I did not say that, but I'll simply take credit.
Somebody's out there listening to this and they're gonna be like, I said that.
Exactly. Well, that was a lot to unpack there. So let's take a step back and talk through some of the details. So when you were first negotiating it from 240 to 225, I'm guessing that's before you had it under contract.
Yep.
Was there some, science or math going on in terms of calculating the rehab needed for the 10 units, or did you kind of do a flat 2-3K per unit?
I probably should say there was some math involved in there. The reality is I saw that it had been on the market for a little while. I guess he had listed it, but it was was one of those, like, there's one picture of the outside, and so no one really looked at it. So it had been listed for a while. Um, and so whenever we were walking around talking through the property, I was just kind of playing the, like, ooh, I don't know about that. That's kind of, this looks bad. Ooh, what's wrong with that? Oh, why does that look like that? Type of mentality. So that I did not appear excited about anything. And then, whenever I gave it like 2 days, and I was hoping he would call me to ask me some, whatever, but he didn't. So I ended up texting him. And I just was like, hey, look, man, I feel like since we took the time, I should at least talk to you about this. How about 200? And then he came back and we went back and forth. And that was really just me deciding, like, hey, you know what? At this point, I can't lose at this price. So I'm going to offer low and see what happens. I knew the 240 would work because it was bringing in 4,000 in income. So it was already like 1.6% of value, like was like 4,100 a month in income, and it was only listed for 240. So I knew that no matter how bad stuff got, I would at least make a couple $100. So I was just trying to negotiate for the sake of, lowering the price a little bit. I actually didn't plan, a lot of people go in and they do the $2,000 or $3,000 per unit right away, and they do all these fancy things. I basically went in with the mentality of, it's going to cash flow. I'm going to save money. When somebody moves out, I'll fix their unit. Yeah. Whether that's between their deposit or not, and whatever. I had some money budgeted for the first few because I knew I was going to evict them, but I just figured I'd save the rest of the money as I went to build up and take care of the issues. I didn't do like a full repositioning where you move in and you change everything and then you get ready to where you can flip it. I just kind of took it slow because that was the biggest thing I'd done so far. So I didn't really know what I was doing with it. Hindsight, yeah, it'd probably be smart to have, $2,000 or $3,000 a unit, or some people do the square footage where they do a price per square foot for repairs. And you have all that budgeted ahead of time so you can do it right away and increase rents faster. But you don't have the money and you still want to get started, you find a way.
Yeah, and it seems like you still did quick napkin math when you're just looking at the deal in terms of rent to value and the number of units and the income that it was bringing in. You knew that it was going to cash flow. And I think you're being humble here, but with only 5% down, 10% seller financing, I think it's just a really good deal that I would jump on as well. So that's really awesome. In terms of finding the seller, were they like a older investor that had owned the property free and clear? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because it was interesting that they had a duplex that they didn't want to sell. So I'm curious if they were just having a really tough time managing this 10 unit. Were they in distress?
I think they had some issues with this 10 unit. I don't know what they paid for it. I would be willing to bet they paid a little bit more than they should have. And it looked like there wasn't a ton of, it wasn't bad in regards to deferred maintenance, but like the exterior of the building had just kind of fallen apart. It wasn't in the best area. I don't know who their property manager was. And I don't want to talk too much smack, but they weren't my property manager. And I'll kind of leave it at that. Because they had people, like they had 2 registered sex offenders living in there, and they only knew about one of them. The other one they had like missed because they didn't do a background check. They just took an application, and he decided not to disclose that, and they didn't notice. Like, those are really basic management things. You should probably know who you're renting to. And then there were some other things, like one of the tenants, who was one of the registered sex offenders, was letting people live in the laundry room. Like, he was letting people into the laundry room and letting them crash in there and sleep in there. And the tenants knew that, but the ownership didn't. So I think that they were kind of their own worst enemy in some regards to managing. And I think they were pretty fed up with just the crap that was going on. It was kind of, even when we took over, as soon as people in the neighborhood noticed that we were starting to paint and take stuff over, we started getting like deliveries of mattresses and couches in front of our property because they knew that the city would call and we would get rid of it for them. But they've kind of calmed down now as we started, not throwing them back on their property, but talking to them and saying like, hey, look, we know that this is your couch. So this is how much it's going to cost you to move it unless it just disappears. Anyway, so yeah, I think that there were some management issues, and they were really fed up with the property because it'd been listed for a while, and I don't think anyone had looked at it really, which should have raised some red flags. But again, it cash flowed. So
Yeah. And just for the benefit of our listeners, I just want to reiterate this because a lot of the times when I talk to other investors, I get the feedback, hey, the market's too hot right now. There's no deals out there. But, like David did, he sent out mailing and he found this seller in distress. And basically, you're not looking for sellers who want to sell. You're looking for sellers who need to sell. And just like the deal that I found also in Kansas City, Missouri, where I got 20K of equity right off the bat, that's because she needed to sell. She was in distress. She didn't no longer wanted to be a landlord. She was living out of state. And as long as I solved her problem of getting her out of this property, she didn't mind giving me the extra equity. So in this same situation, it seems like the owner of this Templex was just tired of managing this property, and it was also being mismanaged. So David kind of stepped in as a savvy investor and kind of turned things around. So make sure that you're not looking for people who want to sell again. You're looking for people who need to sell.
that's it.
Awesome. In terms of this 10 unit, I guess, did you have some reserves set up? I know you mentioned that you ran into a $2,000 roof issue, and I guess the more units you have, there is that possibility, especially in the beginning, where things could go wrong and you can find more things as you discover. Um, how much reserves did you end up kind of booking?
Yeah, I kind of had reserves. I had reserves in a non-traditional sense where I had a $70,000 home equity line of credit pulled out on my single family house. So I did not have any cash reserves. I just knew that if something went terribly wrong, I could write a check from the HELOC and it would cover it. And I mean, the interest on a HELOC is not terrible, so I figured it would work out. The problem with that is that sometimes you write checks for more than you need to because it's like, I got money laying around. But, I say that because my HELOC is now maxed out from buying another property and doing some other stuff. But, it's still all good debt. It returns money. But, yeah, so I did that. I didn't have I didn't have the money laying around. So I pulled the equity out of a property that my wife had owned before we met, and use that. And, as long as I keep the property and keep making the payments on the HELOC, it works out. So, and and the nice thing with the HELOC is, if I ever get really fed up with the loan or I get to a point where I can't repay the loan because the interest is high or whatever, like if I get over water with it, if I sell the house, then we're good. As long as the house, appraises for enough still to make the money back, which it will. So it's kind of a safe, like a worst case scenario, you sell a house and you're covered. So it worked out. At this point, I think I bought a 5 acre patch of land, the Tenplex, repainted the Tenplex, and put a down payment on a 40 unit, all with that HELOC. So I'd say it might be maxed out, but it's done its part for me. So
I love the strategies that you're using because, my reserves is also my HELOC as well. Although I have, I could technically wait until my savings account accumulates to like $30,000-$40,000. But for me as an investor, I don't want money sitting there. I need it to work for me and make more money, friends, and bring it back to me. So I love the HELOC strategy just because, hey, I have, a $50,000 HELOC line that I can write a check if things go wrong. But if it doesn't go wrong, I don't use it and I'm not charged the interest. So it's kind of like a reward, a negative reward, so to say. I don't know.
yeah.
But I love that strategy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips and tricks that you can kind of share with our listeners in terms of any creative financing? I know I'm curious about this cattle financing that you kind of mentioned before. And also, if you can speak a little bit about the biggest mistake or lesson learned in your investing journey so far.
Ooh, yeah. All right. So creative financing. There's so many ways to do anything with that. If the most important piece to creative financing is to just find a good deal. If you find a good deal, you can find money, right? People like good deals. They will pay for good deals. So you can find money, whether that's a relative, whether that's a private lender, whether that's a hard money lender, whether that's, whatever you want to do. If you find a really good deal, it's not hard to find somebody else who likes to make money and has a little bit of it to say, hey, if you lend me 100 grand, I'll return it as 110 grand in 6 months or whatever. That's a 20% annual return. So they might be more than happy to do that. And if you made 20,000, you gave them 10,000, like you both win. So especially because it was not your money. So you basically gave yourself 10 grand for free for a little bit of work. So there's always ways. I like seller financing, but that only really works if someone has a ton of equity in the deal. A lot of people don't like to do it. You got to try to sell it to people who are retiring is the best market because they don't want the tax hit. They might still want some cash flow. I've had decent success with that. The cattle financing. So if you read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, he talks about not saying I can't do that, but saying how can I do that? I kind of use that mentality, but to be honest, this was not an investment. This was how do I try to turn a non-investment into an investment because I want this. So it was a 5-acre patch of land. It was next door to our primary residence. And we were like, well, shoot, if that guy ever sells it, we want it. And we told him, hey, if you ever sell this land in the middle of us, because he owned a house on one side of it, I owned the other house. And so this middle stretch was his. And I was like, hey, Adam, if you ever sell that stretch, I want it. And he was never going to sell it. And then his job relocated him. So he sold. And we had bugged him enough about it that he called us when the property was under contract and said, hey, look, the buyer's willing to buy this extra 5 acres for $6,000 an acre or $7,000 an acre. If you can beat that, it's yours. So it was a little overpriced. We paid $8,000 an acre, so 40 grand, which, given that I live in Hawaii, sounds dirt cheap, but in Missouri, that's probably about $2,000 an acre more than the going rate. Just because we wanted it. And we wanted it for selfish reasons. We wanted to not have someone build a house right next to us, and we wanted to have the land in case we ever wanted to do anything with it, and just have more land than we had at the time. So it was not necessarily a good investment. In fact, I knew it was going to cost me about $350 a month, and it wasn't going to make any money because there wasn't a house on it. And it's not in an area where the market's going to appreciate. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So it's going to be a long time before the city line catches up with us and raises the value. That being said, her dad, my wife's dad, raises cattle, and we had like 3 or 4 cows that we had just had because they were, it was kind of fun for the kiddo to have cows. And you sell like one a year and you make like $1,000, and then we give half of that to the father-in-law for taking care of the few cows. And for a few months of the year they grazed on our property, and for a few months of the year they grazed on his land. But we realized, and I was talking to the father-in-law, that if we went up to 10 acres, we could have 10 or 12 head of cattle, which is not huge, but 10 or 12 head of cattle would probably make about $8,000 a year. And they would only cost like $4,200 to $4,500 to maintain the property. So we were like, okay. And we thought about like, there's a way with the bank, if we had done like an agricultural loan on the property, we could have probably gotten it to where it was like a once a year payment for the 5 acres. And then we could have done like, okay, we'll pay in full on this month and we'll sell our cattle the month prior and it'll work out. We ended up doing a more traditional, just every month payment. But we've slowly been growing the herd. So the first year we might have probably lost a few thousand, or probably made only about half the money back. Because we, instead of selling cattle, we were holding all the females back to grow the herd a little bit. We're up to 8 or 9 right now. And this year we sold 4 of them earlier, which covered our entire mortgage payment for the year. And then we've got 3 or 4 more that we'll sell in October. So this year we'll be cash flow positive on our cattle. And next year we'll have another 2 or 3 that we hold back. And when those finally are able to breed, we should be cash flowing about $5,000 a year on a property that has almost no expenses because the fence is already up and the cows mow it with their mouth. So
that's awesome.
And they fertilize it. It's great. So we had some upfront costs because we had to put in new fencing. We had to clear out some trees with a bulldozer. But it's actually a really nice piece of land too. It's like sits up a little bit higher than the other one. It has a view. And the cool thing is, if we ever want to, we could split that 10 acres into 3 lots, 2 or 3 lots, and we could, keep one and sell the other 2, or or buy a house and build a house in one of the other plots and rent the one we have now. And there's opportunity there to turn the land into a more valuable asset as well. But for now, hey, we're going to make our money back via cows. And the other benefit with that, and this is for all the PETA people out there, is I like steak and I get free beef. If I decide not to sell a cow, I just keep the cow. You should see my father-in-law's deep freeze. It is a full-size deep freeze, and you open it and it's literally just, what kind of meat would you like today? Would you like a T-bone? Would you like a New York strip? How about some ground chuck? I mean, it's great. You just walk across the street, grab a pound of beef and go make tacos. So.
Oh, wow. That sounds awesome. I'm a huge steak guy as well.
Free steak,
yeah,
better steak, and it pays for land. Can't go wrong.
Yeah, that's awesome. So where can our listeners go to find more about you and reach out to you if they have any questions?
From military to millionaire. You can, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, it's all From Military to Millionaire. The only thing that's different is there was a similar name for a podcast. So the podcast I have is called the Military Millionaire Podcast rather than From Military to Millionaire. But anyway, if you type in From Military to Millionaire, I will pop up. And if I don't pop up, then someone else did a better job with SEO and took over my search engine optimization. But as of right now, I will pop up. So
yeah, make sure you listen for the drums and the horns in the beginning of the podcast, and you'll know it's David. Awesome so much. So I'll have all of that in the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday with us. And if you have any questions, please reach out to bo@biggercashflow.com. Catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. Please remember that opinions of the guests are their own, and nothing on this show should be considered personal or professional advice. Please consult your tax, legal, or financial advisor for personal advice that fit your unique situation. See you next time.